The form said Reception Center 7 in a font I recognized from my driver's license renewal. And that is the detail I keep returning to, because I think it is the reason I am still trying to explain this to myself instead of to anyone else. I want to start there, with the font, because if I start with what happened at the field, I will lose the thread, and the thread is the only thing I have left that resembles thinking. The font was Helvetica, or something close to it, the same weight, the same spacing, and there was a small state seal in the upper left corner, slightly pixelated the way official seals always are when they've been through 3 generations of copying. The paper was the cheap kind, the kind they use for jury summons. When I read it for the first time, sitting at my kitchen table with the radio on low and a cup of coffee going cold, I felt something I would later have to account for. I felt relief. I felt the specific, physical relief of a person who has been told that someone in a building somewhere has already thought about this and made a plan, and all I had to do was follow the plan. That feeling is what I want to talk about. Not the outbreak, not the field, not the gymnasium. The feeling. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a 4-unit building in a town I won't name, because naming it makes it sound like I'm reporting, and I am not reporting, I am trying to understand. The building had a shared mailbox bank in the lobby, and the notice came through the mailbox bank, not the door, which meant it was treated as routine correspondence rather than emergency communication. I want to note that. The choice to deliver it through standard mail rather than as a flyer slid under the door was, in retrospect, a piece of information I should have read. I did not read it. I read the seal. The notice was 3 pages. The first page was an instruction sheet. The second page was a map. The third page was a registration form to be completed and brought with me. I read all 3 pages twice. I want to be honest about that, because later I will have to be honest about the things I did not understand, and I want to establish that I was not careless. I was the opposite of careless. I was the kind of person who reads instructions twice. The instruction sheet said that residents in my zone were being asked. The word was asked, not ordered, and I noted the word and dismissed the noting, to report to a designated reception point between certain hours, on certain days, depending on the last digit of their residential address. My building was an even number. My day was Wednesday. My window was 10 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. I was instructed to bring identification, the completed registration form, any prescription medications in their original containers, and a single bag of personal effects not exceeding a stated weight. I was instructed not to bring pets. I was instructed not to drive my own vehicle to the reception point. Transportation would be provided from a staging area 3 blocks from my building. I was instructed to wear a mask, which I already owned, and gloves, which I did not, and to maintain distance from other registrants in the staging area. The map showed the staging area as a small red circle on the corner of 2 streets I knew well. The reception center was not on the map. The map ended at the staging area. I noted this too and dismissed the noting, because of course the map ended at the staging area. They were not going to publish the location of the reception center on a document that could be photographed and posted online. That was a security decision, and I respected security decisions. I was the kind of person who respected security decisions. I want to pause here and describe the radio, because the radio matters. For 3 weeks before the notice came, the radio had been the dominant sound in my apartment. I had stopped watching television because the television felt performative, and I had stopped reading social media because social media felt like being shouted at by a crowd. But the radio I kept on, low, almost all the time, because the radio felt like a thing being said by one person to another person in a calm voice. The voice on the radio, in those 3 weeks, had moved through stages. First, it had described the outbreak as a regional event, contained, being monitored. Then it had described the outbreak as a developing situation, with cases reported in 3 additional states. Then it had described the outbreak as a national concern and had begun to read, at the top of each hour, a list of guidance from the relevant agency. The guidance had grown longer each day. The voice reading it had not changed. The voice was a man's voice, mid-range, unhurried, with the small, dry pauses of someone reading from a printed page he had not written. I trusted the voice. I want to be clear about that. I trusted the voice because the voice did not perform. The voice did not raise itself. The voice read what it was given, and what it was given got more elaborate, and the elaboration of the guidance was, to me, evidence that the situation was being managed by people who were taking it seriously enough to update their guidance. I now think this was the beginning of my mistake. Not a discrete moment, but a posture. I had decided, without deciding, that the elaboration of guidance was the same thing as the management of risk. I had decided that the existence of a plan was the same thing as the plan being correct. I had decided that the calmness of the voice describing the plan was a property of the plan, rather than a property of the voice. I mention this because by the time the notice came through the mailbox bank, my disposition was already set. The notice did not have to convince me of anything. The notice simply confirmed, in my hand, the thing the radio had been priming me to expect. There would be reception centers. There would be transportation. There would be a window, and a list, and a bag, and a form. I had been waiting, without knowing I was waiting, to be told what to do. On the Tuesday night before my Wednesday window, I packed. I packed the way the instructions told me to pack. One bag, under the stated weight. Identification in a sealed plastic envelope inside an interior pocket. Prescriptions in their original containers. I had two, neither serious, a blood pressure medication and an inhaler I rarely used. I packed 3 changes of clothes, because the instructions said to pack for several days, and I interpreted several as 3. I packed a small toiletry kit. I packed a paperback book I had been reading, a novel about a man who builds a boat. I packed a charging cable. I did not pack the charger itself, because I had read somewhere that reception centers would have charging stations, and I wanted to keep the bag underweight. I packed the registration form, completed in blue ink, signed and dated. I packed a granola bar, because I was nervous and the act of packing food calmed me. I did not pack any cash, because I had read that reception centers were operating on a non-monetary basis, and besides, the ATM down the street had been out of service for 9 days and the bank lobby had been closed for 6. I went to bed at 10. I lay awake until almost 2. I want to record what I thought about, lying there, because it is the last clear interior monologue I have from before. I thought about my sister, who lived in another state, and whom I had spoken to on the phone 4 days earlier. She had told me she was staying. Her town had not been issued a notice. She had said, in a voice I now remember as careful, that she did not understand why my town had been issued one and hers had not. I had told her the difference was probably population density, or proximity to a confirmed case, or some other variable I did not need to understand because the people who issued the notices understood it. She had said okay in a way that I did not, at the time, recognize as the word a person uses when they have decided not to argue. I thought about her in the dark, and I thought about calling her in the morning before I left, and I decided not to, because I did not want to wake her, and because I would call her from the reception center, where, I assumed, there would be phones, or at least signal, or at least a way to send a message that said I made it. I want you to notice the assumption inside that thought. I assumed that the reception center would allow me to communicate outward. I had no basis for that assumption. The notice did not say so. The notice said nothing about communication. I made the assumption because I could not imagine a place that would not allow it. My imagination was the source of the assumption, not the document. This is the pattern I am trying to describe. I woke at 6. I made coffee. I drank it standing at the counter. I rinsed the cup, dried it, and returned it to the cabinet because I did not want to come back to a dirty cup, and I was operating, in those last hours, under the unexamined belief that I would come back. The instructions had said several days. I was leaving for several days. People who leave for several days return. The cup went back in the cabinet. I locked the apartment. I put the key in the small interior pocket of my bag, next to the identification envelope. I walked down the stairs and out into a morning that was clearer and colder than I had expected for the season. The street was empty. I want to describe the emptiness precisely, because I have been over this moment many times and I cannot determine, even now, whether I should have read it differently. The street was not abandoned. It was empty. There is a distinction. An abandoned street has a quality of recent departure. Doors ajar, things knocked over, a sense that something was interrupted. The street I walked onto was orderly. The cars were parked. The trash bins were at the curb, because it was a Wednesday and Wednesday was trash day. The lights in the windows of the houses across the street were off, but the lights had been off the previous Wednesday too, because most people on my block worked daytime hours. The emptiness of the street was, in every observable detail, indistinguishable from a normal Wednesday morning at 7:30, except that there was no one walking and no one driving, and no sound of a bus on the next block, and no sound of a dog, and no sound at all except the sound of my own footsteps and a wind I had not noticed from inside. I noted the silence and dismissed the noting. I told myself the silence was because everyone in my zone was either already at the staging area or preparing to leave for it. I told myself the silence was a successful evacuation in progress. I told myself the silence was the plan working. I now think the silence was the first piece of evidence that the plan was something other than what I believed it to be, but I want to be careful about that, because hindsight is a cheap instrument and I am trying to use a more honest one. I walked the 3 blocks to the staging area. I passed 17 houses. I counted, not deliberately, but in the way a mind counts when it has nothing else to do. I saw no one in any window. I saw one cat, sitting on a porch railing, watching me. I remember the cat with unusual clarity. It was orange and white, and it tracked me with its head as I passed, and it did not move otherwise. I remember thinking, in a small flickering way, that someone had not taken their cat. The instructions had said no pets. Someone had complied. The staging area was a paved corner lot that, on normal days, hosted a farmer's market on Saturdays. There were perhaps 40 people standing in it when I arrived. I want to register my reaction to seeing those 40 people because the reaction is important. I felt relief again, the same relief as the seal on the form. 40 people, standing in a paved lot, holding bags, wearing masks, was, to me, evidence. It was evidence that the notice was real, that the plan was happening, that I was not the only person who had received the document and decided to comply. The presence of other compliers reassured me of my own compliance. I want to underline that, because it is a mechanism I did not understand I was using. I joined the back of what I took to be a line, though it was not really a line, more of a loose congregation oriented toward the curb, where, presumably, the transportation would arrive. I stood 3 feet from the nearest person, as instructed. I did not speak to anyone. No one spoke to anyone. There was a quality to the silence in that lot that I have not been able to describe accurately to myself, and I have tried. It was not a frightened silence. It was not a grieving silence. It was the silence of people who had each, individually, made the same private decision, and who did not want to acknowledge to one another that the decision had been private, because acknowledging that would have required acknowledging that there had been a decision at all, rather than a simple following of instructions. A woman in front of me was holding the hand of a child of perhaps 7. The child was holding a stuffed animal of some kind, a rabbit I think, and was looking up at the woman, and the woman was looking at the curb, and was not looking at the child. I want to record that I did not, in that moment, find this strange. I now find it almost unbearable. At the time, I thought, that woman is being responsible. She is not letting her face show anything that would frighten her child. She is performing calm for the child's sake. I admired her. I did not understand that what I was watching was a person who could not afford to look at her child, because if she looked at her child, she would not be able to put her child on the bus. The buses came at 8:40. There were 3 of them. They were school buses, repainted white, with the word transport stenciled on the sides in black, and a small version of the same state seal from my notice on the doors. They were driven by men in light blue uniforms I did not recognize. The men did not get out. The doors opened. A woman in a similar light blue uniform, but with a clipboard, stepped out of the lead bus and walked into the lot and began to call names from her clipboard. She called the names in alphabetical order. She did not call all the names. She called perhaps half of them, and then she said, in a clear voice, that those whose names had been called should board the first bus, and those whose names had not been called should remain in the staging area for the second wave. She did not say when the second wave would arrive. My name was in the second half of the alphabet. My name was not called. I want to record what I felt when my name was not called. I felt impatient. I felt mildly inconvenienced. I did not feel suspicious. I did not feel that the system was sorting me. I felt that the system had a procedure, and the procedure was alphabetical, and procedures were good, because procedures were how you moved 40 people onto buses without chaos. The first bus filled. The woman with the clipboard helped the mother with the child up the steps. The mother went up first. The child went up second. The child turned at the top step and looked back, not at the lot, but at the sky, in the direction of nothing in particular, and then went in. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. The second bus pulled forward to take its place at the curb. The third bus remained behind it. The woman with the clipboard did not call any more names. She stood by the door of the second bus and waited. We waited with her. The minutes did a thing minutes do in situations like that, where they elongate without lengthening, where each one feels separate from the next. I checked my watch. It was 9:10. I checked it again. It was 9:11. I checked it again. It was 9:11. I stopped checking. At 9:40, the woman with the clipboard turned and boarded the second bus. The doors closed behind her. The second bus pulled away. The third bus pulled forward. Its doors opened. A different woman, also in light blue, also with a clipboard, stepped down. She read names. She read my name. I boarded. I want to describe the inside of the bus. I want to describe it because the inside of the bus was the last environment I was in that resembled, in any way, a place a person had designed for the comfort of another person. The seats were the green vinyl seats of a school bus. The windows were the sliding windows of a school bus. The smell was the dry rubber and paper smell of a school bus. There were 19 of us on the bus, including me. I counted. I sat in the third row from the back, on the right side, alone, with my bag on my lap. The driver did not turn around. The woman with the clipboard sat in the front seat, facing forward. She did not speak. The doors closed. The bus pulled away from the curb. We drove for an hour and 10 minutes. I want to describe the route, because the route is the part one have gone back to in my mind more often than any other part, and because the route is the part where, if I am being honest, I had the first thought I should have followed. We drove through my town and out of my town, on the route I would have expected, given the location of the regional facilities I knew about, the hospital, the county offices, the National Guard Armory. I assumed, without being told, that we were going to one of these places. We passed the hospital. We did not turn in. We passed the county offices. We did not turn in. We passed the armory. We did not turn in. We continued out of the developed area and onto a state route I had driven perhaps twice in my life, in the direction of farmland and low hills and a part of the county I associated with apple orchards and a single small lake. I noted that we had passed every facility I would have guessed. I told myself that the reception centers were probably in less obvious locations for security reasons. I told myself that the people who had planned this had known what they were doing, and that what they were doing was not visible to me from the third row of a repainted school bus. This was the moment. I want to mark it. This was the moment when the model in my head and the evidence in front of my eyes diverged, and I chose the model. I want to be precise about why I chose the model. I did not choose it because I was stupid. I did not choose it because I was passive. I chose it because the alternative, that the people on this bus, including me, were being taken somewhere that had not been disclosed by a system whose purpose I had assumed rather than verified, was a thought that, if I allowed it to fully form, would have required me to do something. Stand up, ask a question, demand the bus stop. And I could not imagine doing any of those things, because doing any of them would have made me the person on the bus who was making a scene, and the entire structure of my compliance, from the seal on the form to the silence in the lot, had been built on the premise that making a scene was the wrong response to a situation that was being managed. So I sat. I watched the orchards go by. I watched a hawk on a fence post. I watched the woman with the clipboard, who did not move, who did not turn, who did not speak, for 70 minutes. We arrived at a field. I want to be careful here, because the word field will do work the word should not have to do, and I want to describe what I actually saw. It was a flat, mowed expanse of perhaps 15 acres, bordered on 3 sides by a low chain-link fence and on the 4th by a line of pines. There was a single gravel access road. There were no buildings on the field itself. At the far end of the field, near the pines, there was a row of what I initially took to be tents, large white canvas structures, perhaps 8 of them, with peaked roofs, and beside the tents, a smaller cluster of vehicles, including 2 more white buses, 3 vans, and a generator trailer. There were people on the field. They were moving in small groups between the tents. They wore the same light blue uniforms as the woman with the clipboard, and as the men driving our buses. There were, as far as I could see, no civilians visible on the field. No one in street clothes. No one with a bag. The bus stopped at the gravel access road. The doors opened. The woman with the clipboard stood. She turned, for the first time, to face us, and she said, in the same clear voice she had used to read names in the lot, that we would now disembark, that we should bring our bags, that we should proceed in single file along the marked path to reception, and that we should comply with all instructions given by reception staff. She said this without inflection. She did not welcome us. She did not thank us. She did not, I want to note, refer to the place as Reception Center 7 or by any number at all. She referred to it only as reception. I want to record what I noticed and what I did not notice as I stepped off the bus. I noticed that the air smelled of mowed grass and diesel. I noticed that there were no birds on the field, though there had been birds on the fence posts along the road. I noticed that the marked path was a line of small orange flags on wire stakes, leading from the gravel road across the field to the nearest tent, a distance of perhaps 200 yards. I did not notice, until later, that the gravel access road we had driven in on was the only road into the field. I did not notice, until much later, that there were no signs anywhere on the field, no signage on the tents, no directional arrows, no posted instructions, nothing printed. A reception center designed for processing civilians would, I would later realize, be saturated with signage, because signage is how processing centers reduce the burden of repeated verbal instruction. The absence of signage meant that every instruction had to be given by a person, in real time, to each individual. This was not efficient. This was deliberate. I did not understand, in the field, what it was deliberate for. I walked along the line of orange flags. The 19 of us walked in a loose single file, in the order we had disembarked, with perhaps 6 feet between each person. No one spoke. The grass under my shoes was even and dry. My bag was light on my shoulder. I remember thinking, in the middle of that walk, that I had imagined this moment differently. I had imagined a building. I had imagined a queue indoors. I had imagined fluorescent lights and folding tables and a person checking my form against a list. The field was not the image I had carried in my head from the moment I read the notice, but I revised the image as I walked, the way a person revises an image when reality contradicts it. And by the time I reached the first tent, I had already convinced myself that this, the field, the flags, the tents, was what of course a reception center would look like, and that my prior image had been naive. The image of a person who had not thought carefully about the logistics of mass civilian processing in a public health emergency. This is the work the mind does. I want to describe it precisely. The mind does not maintain two images, the prior and the current, and compare them. The mind overwrites. The new image becomes the only image, and the prior image is remembered only as a vague, slightly embarrassing earlier version of one's own thinking. By the time I reached the first tent, I had already forgotten that I had ever expected a building. At the first tent, a man in a light blue uniform asked for my registration form. I gave it to him. He clipped it to a clipboard of his own. He asked for my identification. I gave it to him. He examined it, compared it to the form, and handed the identification back. He did not hand the form back. He asked for the names of any family members who had been with me at the staging area. I told him I had been alone. He asked for the name and contact information of my nearest relative. I gave him my sister's name and her cell phone number. He wrote these on the form. He asked whether I had any medical conditions or current prescriptions. I told him about the blood pressure medication and the inhaler. He noted these. He asked whether I had eaten that morning. I told him I had not. He nodded. He directed me to the second tent. I want to register here, a thing I felt and did not act on. When he asked for my sister's contact information, I felt a small, specific resistance. Not alarm. Resistance. The feeling of a question being slightly outside the scope I had expected. The notice had not said anything about next of kin information. The form I had filled out the night before had not asked for it. This was a question being added in real time by a person in a tent on a field. I told myself the question was being added because the registration system was being refined as it operated, which was reasonable, because no system of this scale was going to be perfect on first deployment. I told myself the question was being asked of everyone. I told myself the question was for my benefit, so that, in the event of any issue, my sister could be contacted. I now understand that I told myself a sequence of plausible things in order to avoid telling myself the one implausible thing, which was, they are collecting next of kin information because they anticipate needing it. I walked to the second tent. At the second tent, a woman in a light blue uniform took my temperature with a forehead scanner, asked me to remove my mask briefly so she could photograph my face, and asked me to step onto a scale. She recorded the numbers without showing them to me. She asked whether I had had close contact with any confirmed or suspected cases in the prior 14 days. I told her I had not. She asked whether I had experienced any symptoms in the prior 14 days. I told her I had not. She asked whether I was currently experiencing any symptoms. I told her I was not. She nodded. She directed me to the third tent. At the third tent, a different man in a light blue uniform asked me to open my bag. I opened it. He looked through it. He removed the granola bar and placed it in a plastic bin to his left. He removed the paperback novel and placed it in the same bin. He removed the prescription bottles and examined the labels and placed them back in the bag. He removed the charging cable and placed it in the bin. He zipped the bag. He handed the bag back to me. He directed me to the fourth tent. I want to describe the bin. The bin was clear plastic, about the size of a small storage tote. It already contained, when my items were added to it, perhaps 30 other items: paperback books, snacks, magazines, a small radio, a set of earbuds, a deck of cards, a knitting project in a cloth bag, a child's coloring book, a photograph in a small frame. The bin contained, in other words, the comfort items and the personal items of the people who had walked through the third tent before me. The bin did not contain identification, prescriptions, or clothing. It contained only the things a person brings with them to pass time and to feel like themselves. I stood looking at the bin for what was probably 2 seconds and felt for the second time, more sharply, the small specific resistance I had felt in the first tent. I did not say anything. I walked to the fourth tent. At the fourth tent, a woman in a light blue uniform handed me a folded set of clothes: gray sweatpants, a gray short-sleeved shirt, gray socks, a pair of canvas slip-on shoes, and a small mesh bag, and instructed me to step behind a curtain at the rear of the tent, change into the provided clothing, place all of my own clothing and personal effects, including my bag, into the mesh bag, label the mesh bag with my name on a provided tag, and return to the front of the tent. She said this in a tone that was neither kind nor unkind. She said it as a sequence of instructions. I did exactly as she said. I want to record that I did exactly as she said, because there was a moment behind the curtain, with my own clothes in my hands and the gray clothes on the small folding stool in front of me, when I could have done something other than what I did. I could have stopped. I could have walked back out and asked a question. I could have asked where my belongings were going to be stored, whether I would receive a receipt, when I would get my things back. I did not ask. I changed. I labeled the mesh bag. I handed the mesh bag to the woman. She placed it on a rolling cart with perhaps 15 other identical mesh bags. She directed me to the fifth tent. I want to be honest about why I did not ask. I did not ask because by the fourth tent, I had already accepted the logic of the field. The logic of the field was that each tent processed one stage of a procedure, and the procedure was being administered by people who knew what came next, and asking a question would have been an interruption of the procedure, and an interruption of the procedure would have made me the kind of person who interrupts procedures. I had spent the previous 2 hours establishing, through every choice I had made, that I was not that kind of person. To become that kind of person now would have required me to disavow every choice I had made since the kitchen counter that morning, and the cup in the cabinet, and the locked apartment, and the empty street, and the silent lot, and the bus, and the orchards, and the hawk, and the field, and the orange flags, and the first 3 tents. The cost of asking the question was not the question. The cost was the entire structure of my own compliance, which I would have had to admit, to myself, had been a structure rather than a series of correct individual decisions. I went to the fifth tent. At the fifth tent, a man in a light blue uniform handed me a small paper cup containing 2 pills and a paper cup of water. He told me the pills were a prophylactic medication, standard for all incoming registrants, designed to reduce the likelihood of infection during the holding period prior to transport to long-term placement. He used the phrase long-term placement. It was the first time anyone on the field had used a phrase that referred to anything beyond the immediate moment. He waited for me to take the pills. I took the pills. I drank the water. I handed the cups back. He directed me to the 6th tent. I want to stop here and describe what I was thinking as I walked from the 5th tent to the 6th tent, because this is the last interval in which I was thinking in the manner I had been thinking all morning, and I want to be faithful to it. I was thinking that long-term placement was a phrase that did not match anything in the notice. The notice had said several days. The notice had said reception center. The notice had said registration. The notice had not used the phrase long-term placement and had not, anywhere in its 3 pages, indicated that registration at a reception center would be followed by placement of any kind. I was thinking that the phrase was new. I was thinking that the man in the 5th tent had said it casually, as though it were a phrase I would already know, as though the document I had read had contained it, when it had not. And I was thinking, and this is the part one want to be most careful about, that there were 2 possibilities. The first possibility was that long-term placement was a procedural term used internally by the staff that referred to a normal next step that had not been emphasized in the notice because it was understood to be standard. The second possibility was that long-term placement was the actual purpose of the field, and that reception and registration were the names given to the procedure that delivered people to it, and that the notice had not used the phrase because the notice had been written for people like me, and people like me would not have come if the phrase had been used. I want to record that I considered both possibilities. I want to record that, having considered both, I continued walking toward the 6th tent. I continued because I had taken the pills. I continued because my bag was on a rolling cart. I continued because I was wearing gray sweatpants and canvas shoes, and I did not have my own clothes, and I did not have my identification, and I did not have my form, and I did not, in any meaningful sense, have the means to be anyone other than the person the procedure was processing. The procedure had, in 5 tenths, made me into a person whose only available next action was to walk to the 6th tent. I want to underline that this transformation had not been violent. No one had touched me. No one had threatened me. No one had even spoken to me unkindly. The transformation had been administrative. It had been conducted entirely through the acceptance of small, individually reasonable requests. And the cumulative effect of those small, individually reasonable requests was that, by the walk to the 6th tent, I was a person who could not easily leave. I had been disassembled into compliance, 1 tent at a time, and the disassembly had been so gradual that I had assisted in it. The 6th tent was where I saw the gymnasium for the first time, and I want to clarify what I mean by that, because the 6th tent did not contain a gymnasium. The 6th tent contained a single long folding table, behind which sat a woman in a light blue uniform with a laptop, and on the wall behind her, there was a large printed photograph, perhaps 4 feet by 6 feet, mounted on foam board, of the interior of what appeared to be a high school gymnasium that had been converted into a dormitory. Rows of cots, folded blankets, a water station along one wall, a handwritten sign reading quiet hours 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. The photograph was, I understood at once, intended to reassure. It was intended to be the image a registrant carried with them as they left the 6th tent and proceeded to wherever the 7th tent led. It was the image of the place I was being told, without being told, that I was going. The woman at the laptop confirmed my name. She typed for some time. She handed me a laminated card on a lanyard with a number printed on it. My number was 4471 and instructed me to wear the lanyard at all times. She told me that I would now proceed to the holding area, where I would be given a meal, where I would have access to a water station and a sanitation facility, and where I would wait until transport to long-term placement was available. She said transport was expected within 12 to 48 hours, depending on availability. She did not say availability of what. She directed me to the 7th tent. I did not go to the 7th tent. I want to describe what stopped me, because what stopped me was not a thought. It was a piece of paper. As I turned to leave the 6th tent, I noticed, on the corner of the folding table, a small stack of forms. They were stacked face down, but the top form had been placed slightly askew, and a corner of the printed side was visible. The visible corner showed a state seal, the same seal as on my notice, and beneath the seal, in the same Helvetica font, 2 words that were partially legible. Consent to. I cannot tell you what the rest of that sentence said, because I did not pick up the form. I did not turn it over. I did not read it. I walked out of the 6th tent and onto the path between the 6th tent and the 7th tent, and I kept walking, and I did not stop, and I did not turn my head, and I walked off the marked path and across the open grass toward the line of pines at the far edge of the field. I want to be precise about why I did this, because I have asked myself this question many times, and the answer I keep arriving at is not flattering and is not heroic. I did not walk off the path because I had figured something out. I did not walk off the path because I had assembled the fragments of evidence, the missing signage, the next of kin question, the bin of comfort items, the surrendered clothes, the prophylactic pills, the phrase long-term placement, the photograph of the gymnasium, into a coherent picture of what was happening on the field. I had not assembled them. I was still, at the moment I stepped off the path, capable of telling myself that everything I had seen was consistent with a legitimate emergency response operation, and I was still, in some part of myself, telling myself exactly that. I walked off the path because of the partial sentence on the corner of the form. Consent to was a phrase I associated with documents I had signed in medical settings, in legal settings, in employment settings. It was a phrase that meant the document was about to describe something the signer was being asked to permit. And the form was face down. The forms were all face down. They were stacked face down on the table at the end of a procedure that had, by that point, removed my identification, my personal effects, my clothing, and administered an unspecified medication. And the next step in the procedure was a form, beginning with the word consent, that was being kept face down until I was at the table to sign it. I did not need to read the form to know that I did not want to sign it. That is what I had. That is the entire content of the recognition that moved me off the path. I did not have a theory. I had a refusal. The refusal was small and late and barely articulate, and I want to be clear that I am not proud of it, because a refusal that arrives at the sixth tent is a refusal that has already failed 5 times. I walked across the grass toward the pines. I did not run. Running would have been visible. Walking, in gray clothes, on a field where other people in similar gray clothes were also walking between tents, was, for perhaps 90 seconds, indistinguishable from what I was supposed to be doing. I walked at the pace of a person who knew where he was going. I walked past the edge of the cluster of tents. I walked into the high grass at the field's perimeter. I reached the chain-link fence. The fence was 4 feet high. I climbed over it. I tore the gray pants on the top wire. I did not stop. I walked into the pines. I want to record what I heard behind me as I walked into the pines, because I have replayed it many times and I cannot agree with myself about what it was. I heard a voice on a loudspeaker. I cannot tell you what the voice said. I was perhaps 300 yards from the loudspeaker by then, and I was moving away from it, and the wind was moving in the same direction I was moving, and the pines absorbed sound. I heard a tone, a flat tone, calling for attention. I heard a voice. The voice was male. The voice was not raised. The voice spoke for perhaps 30 seconds, and then stopped. I did not hear my number. I did not hear my name. I did not hear any word I could identify. I kept walking. I walked through the pines for what I later determined to have been close to 4 hours. I had no compass. I had no map. I had no phone. I had only the direction of the sun, which was past noon and beginning to descend, and the general knowledge that the field had been east of my town, and that walking west would, eventually, return me to roads I recognized. I walked west. I walked through pines, and then through a log section, and then through a creek that filled my canvas shoes with water, and then through more pines, and then onto a gravel road, and then onto a paved road, and then, near sunset, into the outskirts of a town I did not know, where I stopped at a gas station that was open but unattended, and where I drank water from a sink in the bathroom, and where I sat on the curb behind the building, in gray sweatpants and a torn gray shirt and a number on a lanyard, until it was fully dark. I walked the rest of the way home along county roads. At night, off the shoulder when I heard a vehicle, which was rarely. I reached my building at 4 in the morning. The door to the lobby was unlocked. The mailbox bank was undisturbed. My apartment was as I had left it. The cup was in the cabinet. The radio was off, because I had turned it off before I left. I have been here since. I want to describe what I have done in the days since I came back, because the days since I came back are the part of this account that is hardest for me to render accurately, and I want to try. For the first day, I slept. I slept the way a person sleeps when sleep is the only available form of refusal. I slept through the morning and through the afternoon and into the next night, and when I woke, I drank water and ate a can of soup from my cabinet and slept again. On the second day, I turned on the radio. The voice was the same voice. The man's voice, mid-range, unhurried, with the small dry pauses of someone reading from a printed page he had not written. The voice read, at the top of the hour, the updated guidance from the relevant agency. The guidance had been further elaborated. There were now reception centers in additional zones. There were now staging windows for additional address ranges. There were now provisions for individuals who had not received notices, who could self-report to designated municipal offices, where they would be issued forms and assigned to the next available transport. The voice read the list. The voice did not change. I want to record, with as much honesty as I can find, that on the second day, listening to the voice, I felt a thing I did not expect to feel. I felt, briefly, that I had made a mistake. Not the mistake of going to the field. The opposite mistake. I felt that I had panicked. I felt that I had mistaken a piece of paper at the corner of a table for evidence of a thing I could not name, and that I had abandoned a legitimate procedure halfway through, and that the people I had walked with onto the buses, the woman with the child, the others in the lot, were now safely housed in a gymnasium somewhere, eating a meal, waiting for transport to long-term placement, and that I was sitting in a dark apartment in torn sweatpants with a stolen lanyard around my neck, having broken the only system that had been offered to me. I want to record this because it is the most accurate thing I can tell you about how the system worked. The system did not stop working when I left the field. The system continued working inside my head for 2 more days. On the second day, I almost went back. I sat at the kitchen table with the notice from the mailbox bank in front of me, and I read it again, twice, the way I had read it the first time, and I considered walking to the staging area and waiting for the next bus, and I considered this seriously, for perhaps an hour, because the alternative, that I had been right, that the form on the table had said what I was afraid it said, was a thought that required me to accept things about the voice on the radio, and the seal on the page, and the mother on the bus, and the child with the rabbit, that I did not want to accept. I did not go back. I want to be clear that I did not go back, but I want to be equally clear that the reason I did not go back was not courage and was not certainty. The reason I did not go back was that, on the third day, I tried to call my sister. The call did not connect. I tried 4 times. The 5th time, I got a recorded message that I want to describe precisely, because the message is the only piece of external evidence I have for any of what I am telling you, and I want to be exact about what it said, because it did not say what I had expected, and I want you to hear the difference between what I had expected and what I heard. I had expected the message to say that the number was no longer in service, or that the call could not be completed, or that the system was experiencing high call volume. The message did not say any of those things. The message said, "The party you are trying to reach has been registered. Communication with registered individuals is suspended pending completion of placement. Please try again at a later time." The message was in the same voice as the radio. The same man. Mid-range. Unhurried. The small dry pauses. I have not tried to call my sister again. I have not turned the radio back on. I have not opened the door to the lobby. I have, in the days since the 3rd day, been sitting at this table, writing this, because I do not know who I am writing it for, and because I cannot be sure that anyone will read it, and because the act of writing it is the only thing I have found that is not either compliance or paralysis. I am not a survivor. I want to be clear about that. I am a person who, by a margin so small it does not deserve to be called a margin, walked off a path on a field in the middle of a procedure I had voluntarily entered, for reasons I could not articulate at the time and can only partly articulate now. The people who continued through the 7th tent were not less intelligent than I was. They were not less careful. They were, in every way I could observe, exactly the same as I was, up to and including the moment when the corner of a form on a table did or did not catch their eye. Some of them, I have to assume, saw what I saw. Some of them, I have to assume, did not. Some of them, I have to assume, saw it and continued anyway, because by the 6th tent, continuing was easier than stopping. I do not know how many of each there were. I will probably never know. What I want to say, and what I am having difficulty saying, is that the system that took them was not a trick. I keep wanting to call it a trick, because calling it a trick would mean that the people who built it were dishonest, and that the people who followed it were deceived, and that there is, somewhere, a clean moral line between the deceivers and the deceived. There is no such line. The notice did not lie. The notice said reception center. A reception center is a place that receives people. It does not specify what happens to the people after they are received. The notice said registration. Registration is the act of recording a person's information. It does not specify what the information will be used for. The notice said several days. Several days is the period before transport. It does not specify the destination of the transport. Every word on the notice was, in its narrowest reading, accurate. The notice was honest in the way that a contract is honest. Honest about what it says, silent about what it does not say, and dependent for its operation on the reader filling in the silences with assumptions the document did not make. I filled in the silences. I assumed reception meant welcome. I assumed registration meant protection. I assumed several days meant, and then home. I assumed transport meant to safety. I assumed long-term placement, when I finally heard the phrase, meant housing. None of these assumptions was in the document. All of them were in me. The document was a frame, and I was the picture, and the picture I painted inside the frame was a picture of a system that wanted to save me, because I could not bear to imagine being inside a frame that contained any other picture. This is what I want the people who read this, if there are people who read this, to understand. The mistake was not following instructions. The mistake was believing that the instructions were the whole of the thing. The mistake was treating the document as a description of the world rather than as a prompt offered by people with their own purposes, into which I poured my own picture of what those purposes must be, because the picture I poured was the picture I needed to see. The voice on the radio did not lie. The voice read, faithfully and without inflection, what it was given. The seal on the page did not lie. The seal certified that the page was issued by an authority. The authority did not lie. The authority issued a procedure, and the procedure operated as designed, and the procedure's design, I now believe, though I cannot prove, was to use the calmness of its presentation, the ordinariness of its font, the routineness of its language, to move large numbers of people from their homes to a field, and from a field to a place I did not see, with their willing participation at every step, because willing participation was cheaper and quieter and more complete than any form of coercion. I want to say one more thing, and then I want to stop, because I am tired, and because I am not sure how much longer I can sit at this table before the things I have not let myself think begin to think themselves. I keep returning, in my mind, to the cat on the porch railing. The orange and white cat that watched me as I walked to the staging area. I keep returning to it because it is the only living creature I saw that morning between my apartment and the lot, and because, of all the things I noticed and dismissed that morning, the cat is the one I cannot dismiss in retrospect. The instructions had said no pets. The cat had been left. I told myself, that morning, that someone had complied. I told myself that the cat's owner had done the responsible thing, had left food and water inside, had locked the door, had walked to the staging area without their cat, because the instructions had said no pets, and the instructions were the thing you followed. I now think, and this is the thought I have been circling, and the thought I do not want to write down, but I am going to write down. I now think that the cat was on the porch railing because its owner had left it there, deliberately, on the way out the door, knowing they were not coming back. I think the cat was on the railing because someone, in a house I walked past at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning, had read the same notice I had read, had seen something in it I had not seen, and had decided that the kindest thing they could do, on their way to comply with the instructions they did not believe they could refuse, was to put the cat outside, so that when no one returned, the cat would at least have a chance. I do not know if this is true. I have no way to know if this is true. I am sitting at a table in an apartment in a town that has been almost entirely emptied by a procedure I walked away from at the 6th tent, and I am trying to construct, from a single image of a cat on a railing, a theory of what other people knew that I did not. I may be wrong about the cat. The cat may have simply been outside, the way cats are outside, and its owner may be in the same gymnasium I almost ended up in, eating a meal and waiting for transport to long-term placement, exactly as the photograph on the foam board promised. But I do not think so. I think the person who left that cat saw the document the way a document is supposed to be read, as a thing written by people, for purposes those people had, in language those people chose, and read the silences as well as the words, and understood, before they walked out their door, what I did not understand until I was 4 tenths deep, and what most of the people on the bus with me, I have to assume, never understood at all. I am going to stop writing now. I am going to put this in an envelope, and I am going to walk it down to the mailbox bank in the lobby, and I am going to address it to no one, because there is no one I trust to send it to, and I am going to leave it there, in the slot for outgoing mail, in the hope that someone, a postal worker, a neighbor, a stranger, eventually opens the bank, finds it, and reads it. If you are that person, I want you to know one thing, and only one thing. because it is the only thing I have learned that I am sure of. When the next notice comes, and there will be a next notice, in your town or in another, in this season or in another, with a different seal and a different font and a different phrase that is honest about what it says and silent about what it does not. Read the silences. Read what the document does not say. Read what the voice on the radio is not reading. Read the routes the buses do not take, and the buildings the buses do not stop at, and the words the staff do not use, and the forms that are stacked face down on the corners of tables. The picture you paint inside the frame will not be painted by the people who made the frame. It will be painted by you, out of your own need to believe that someone, somewhere, has already thought about this and made a plan, and that all you have to do is follow the plan. That feeling is the trap. It is not the only trap, and it may not be the worst trap, but it is the trap I walked into on a Wednesday morning, in clean clothes, with a packed bag and a completed form, 3 blocks from a building I had locked behind me. And it is the trap that took the people I walked with. And it is the trap I am writing this down to describe, because I do not have anything else to give. And because describing it is the only act left to me that is not, in some quiet and administrative way, a continuation of my compliance. The cup is still in the cabinet. I have not taken it down. I do not think I am going to.